twin girls vanished without a trace during an innocent game of hide-and-seek at the edge of their family farm, leaving behind nothing but desperate searches and fading hope. But 2 months later, their mother looks under a hay bale inside their old abandoned barn, and what she sees makes her freeze in horror. Lauren Winters sat at her kitchen table with Rachel Bennett, the grief counselor from County Support Services, clutching a mug of cold coffee. Through the window, she watched a search team with dogs making another sweep of the forest edge, exactly 2 months after her twin daughters disappeared during a game of hide-and-seek. The dogs moved methodically through the underbrush, their handlers following close behind with expressions that had grown increasingly grim as days turned into weeks and weeks into months. "Do you feel ready to revisit what happened that day?" Rachel asked gently, following Lauren's gaze to the window. Her voice had the practiced softness of someone accustomed to navigating other people's trauma. Lauren sighed, her fingers tightening around the mug until her knuckles turned white. The ceramic was cool against her skin. She couldn't remember the last time she'd actually finished a hot drink. "We've been over it so many times," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The girls were playing hide-and-seek while I was in town making deliveries. We'd always told them to stay in the Eastfield, never near the road." Rachel nodded, writing something in her notepad. The scratch of pen against paper was oddly comforting in the quiet kitchen. "When I got home, Emma didn't come when I called. My mother-in-law said she was hiding in the barn," Lauren continued, her voice flat from retelling the story countless times to police officers, search coordinators, and now this kind woman across from her. "They found Emma's hair ribbon by the property line, but nothing else." Rachel watched Lauren carefully, her expression neutral but attentive. "And Nathan was watching them?" she asked. Lauren shook her head, loose strands of hair falling across her face. She didn't bother pushing them away. "No. He had his own deliveries that day in Millfield." Her voice took on the mechanical quality of reciting facts that had been repeated endlessly. "He'd arranged for Mrs. Winters, my mother-in-law, to check on them every half hour. She was the one who called me when she couldn't find Emma." Lauren's gaze drifted back to the window, where the search team was now moving deeper into the woods. "Detective Rivera suggested these sessions," she confessed, turning back to face Rachel. "First I lost Mark in the accident, now the girls." Her voice broke on the last word, the grief still raw despite the weeks that had passed. Rachel reached across the table and briefly squeezed Lauren's hand. The touch was unexpected, and Lauren almost pulled away from the momentary connection. "You've endured more than anyone should have to," Rachel said, her professional demeanor softening. "But remember, you're not alone. After losing Mark, your brother-in-law stepped up to handle the farm operations. That's significant support." Lauren nodded but said nothing, her eyes fixed on the search team in the distance. The mention of Nathan brought a fleeting sense of gratitude, quickly subsumed by the overwhelming tide of grief. Nathan had been her rock these past months, handling every aspect of the farm while she spiraled further into despair. After Rachel left, Lauren remained at the kitchen table, staring at the coffee she still hadn't touched. The house creaked and settled around her, too large and too quiet without the twins' laughter echoing through the rooms. The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled her from her thoughts. Lauren. Her mother-in-law appeared in the doorway, her face lined with the same grief that had aged them all beyond their years. "Nathan called. He said he'll be home late tonight. Deliveries across county lines." Lauren nodded absently. Since losing her husband Mark in the farming accident last year, Nathan had been her primary support, handling farm operations and speaking with authorities. He'd stepped into his brother's shoes with a dedication that sometimes bordered on overprotective, but Lauren had been too numb with grief to question it. She glanced out the window again, noticing a section of fence Mark had always kept, perfectly mended, now held together with mismatched wire. A small sign of the strain Nathan must be under, juggling everything. The phone rang, its shrill tone startling in the quiet kitchen. Lauren crossed to the study to answer it, grateful for the momentary distraction. "Mrs. Winters, it's Detective Rivera." The detective's voice was professional, but held a note of something Lauren couldn't quite identify. "I need to verify something. Was Nathan making deliveries in Millfield on the day the twins disappeared?" Lauren frowned, leaning against the desk. Yes, that's what he told me. Why? There was a pause on the line. The market manager in Millfield claims your farm didn't have a booth that day. Lauren's frown deepened. That couldn't be right. Nathan had mentioned the Millfield delivery several times that week. She remembered him loading crates of produce into his truck that morning, the casual wave as he'd driven off down the dirt road. Could you ask Nathan about this discrepancy when he returns tonight? It's probably just a misunderstanding, but we need to be thorough. After hanging up, Lauren stood motionless in the study, trying to make sense of the detective's words. Had there been a misunderstanding, or was Nathan lying about where he went that day? The question felt uncomfortable, almost disloyal after everything he'd done for her. Lauren found herself glancing at Nathan's desk, where he kept the farm records. Maybe she could clarify the delivery date herself. She pulled open the bottom drawer and located the delivery ledger, a thick notebook with Mark's neat handwriting giving way to Nathan's more hurried scrawl. About halfway through, she flipped through the pages, noticing dates crossed out and entries rewritten. The system seemed messier than Mark would have kept it, much like the quick, functional, but not quite right repairs she'd noticed around. The property lately. Poor Nathan, stretched so thin. Lauren's eye caught on several cash withdrawals that seemed unnecessary for regular farm operations. She tried not to think ill of Nathan, who had supported her through so much sorrow. Perhaps he was using cash for farm supplies to avoid credit card fees, an economy Mark had sometimes employed. But a small voice wondered if he might be mismanaging the farm's finances or dipping into the accounts for personal use. She closed the ledger and returned it to the drawer, uneasy but unwilling to dwell on suspicions that felt like a betrayal of the one person who had stood by her through everything. The landline rang again, its ancient bell jangling through the quiet house. Lauren picked it up on the third ring, expecting Detective Rivera with more questions. Lauren, it's Edith Keller. The elderly woman's voice was bright despite the circumstances. I found some photos of the twins from last summer's picnic that I thought you might like to see. Would you like to come over? I've just made a fresh batch of iced tea. 20 minutes later, Lauren walked down the dirt path to Mrs. Keller's farmhouse, grateful for the distraction. The elderly woman had been a fixture in her life since she'd married Mark and moved to the farm. Mrs. Keller welcomed her with the promised tea and several photo albums spread across her kitchen table. I've been organizing these old pictures, Mrs. Keller explained, pulling out a chair for Lauren. Found quite a few of the girls at various events. The church picnic, the harvest festival. Oh, and their birthday last year. Mark was still with us then. Lauren's throat tightened at the mention of her late husband, but she sat down and began turning the album pages. Each photo was like a punch to the chest. Abby and Emma blowing out candles, riding the tractor with Mark, playing tag in Mrs. Keller's garden, their identical blonde braids and matching smiles forever suspended in those captured moments. As Lauren flipped through the album, she stopped at a photo taken 2 months ago. The timestamp in the corner read July 15th. The focus was on Mrs. Keller's grandniece riding a new bicycle, but in the background was Nathan near their barn, carrying what looked like lumber and other construction materials. Lauren blinked, tilting the photo to get a better look. Mrs. Keller, she said slowly, pointing to the timestamp. This says July 15th. Nathan told everyone he was at an equipment auction in Springfield that day. Mrs. Keller adjusted her glasses, leaning forward, to examine the photo. Oh, I remember that day clearly. It was my grandniece's birthday. She tapped the image with a gnarled finger. Your Nathan was quite busy, coming and going with his truck several times, carrying all those supplies. Lauren felt her chest tighten. Are you certain about the date? Nathan specifically mentioned the Springfield auction that morning. I remember because he asked me to call him if any buyer stopped by about the John Deere tractor. He even left the auction catalog on the kitchen counter. Mrs. Keller nodded firmly, her expression resolute. I'm absolutely certain. My grandniece turned 12 on July 15th. Got her those roller skates she wanted. She adjusted her glasses, again, peering at the photo. This picture was taken that afternoon around 4 o'clock. She leaned forward, lowering her voice slightly as if sharing a confidence. Mark never would have approved of construction without consulting you first. Always said a farm was a partnership. Lauren stared at the photo, a cold feeling spreading through her chest. What kind of supplies did you see him carrying? Lumber mostly, some plastic sheeting, and hardware store boxes, Mrs. Keller replied, watching Lauren carefully, her faded, blue eyes shrewd. Is something wrong with the barn? Lauren shook her head slowly. Nathan never mentioned any repairs or projects. Mrs. Keller's eyes narrowed, her mouth setting in a disapproving line. Mark was always transparent about farm decisions, never made a major purchase without discussing it with you first. The unspoken comparison hung in the air between them. Lauren traced the outline of Nathan in the photograph with her fingertip. He was partially turned away from the camera, his face in profile as he carried a long piece of lumber toward the barn. What was he building that day? And why had he lied about being at an auction? The twins' disappearance had already shaken her faith in humanity to its core. Now the thought that Nathan might be keeping secrets about the farm's finances made her stomach turn. Thank you for the photos, Mrs. Keller, Lauren said finally, closing the album. I should be getting back. The search team might need to speak with me. As Lauren walked back to her farmhouse, her mind went to the dwindling savings account Mark had set up for the twins' college fund. She'd noticed the balance was lower than expected when she'd checked it last month, but had attributed it to bank fees or some automatic payment she'd forgotten about. Now she wasn't so sure. Back at home, Lauren decided to organize farm tax documents, hoping the task might distract her from thoughts of the twins. Nathan had been handling finances since Mark's death, but perhaps helping with paperwork could lighten his load. She retrieved the accordion folder from the file cabinet in the study and spread the contents across the kitchen table. As she sorted through banking records, she paused at several credit card charges she didn't recognize. Building supplies from Handover Hardware, a ventilation system from Midwest Agricultural Supply, and something listed as acoustic materials from a specialty retailer she'd never heard of. All purchased in the weeks before the twins disappeared. Her brow furrowed. In confusion, the farm didn't need soundproofing. Lauren stared at the receipt spread across the kitchen table. Were these legitimate farm expenses, or was Nathan using farm money for personal projects? Mark had always been transparent about every penny spent, consulting her on purchases as small as a new set of work gloves. These purchases seemed secretive by comparison, made without any discussion. She felt a growing suspicion that Nathan might be taking advantage of her distraction to siphon money from the farm. The thought brought a wave of guilt. Nathan had been her support system since Mark's death, stepping in to run the farm and help with the twins. Without him, she might have lost everything. But the evidence before her suggested he might not be the selfless brother-in-law she'd believed him to be. When Nathan's truck rumbled up the driveway that evening, Lauren hastily gathered the receipts and tucked them back into the folder. She wasn't ready to confront him directly, not without more information. Instead, she prepared dinner as usual, trying to act normal as they sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The pot roast is good, Nathan said, breaking the silence. His voice was tired, his eyes shadowed from what he described as a long day of deliveries. You're getting your appetite back. That's good to see. Lauren nodded, pushing food around. Her plate. She waited until he'd taken a few more bites before casually mentioning, Detective Rivera called today. He had a question about your Millfield delivery on the day the girls disappeared. She watched Nathan's reaction carefully. His fork paused briefly midair before completing its journey to his mouth. If she hadn't been looking for it, she might have missed the momentary hesitation. What about it? He asked after swallowing. The market manager said our farm didn't have a booth that day. Nathan set his fork down and reached for his water, glass, taking a long drink before responding. Must have been thinking of last month's schedule, he said with a shrug that seemed just slightly too rehearsed. Rivera should focus on actual leads instead of wasting time on calendar mix-ups. He quickly changed the subject to the weather forecast, commenting on the possibility of rain later in the week. Lauren nodded and made appropriate responses, but her mind was cataloging his reaction, adding it to her growing list of concerns. I should turn in early. Nathan announced as he carried his plate to the sink. Got an early delivery run tomorrow. Lauren began clearing the rest of the table. The search teams with dogs will be doing another sweep at first light. Something flashed across Nathan's face. Frustration, annoyance. It was gone so quickly she almost thought she'd imagined it. Another search? He said softly, his back to her as he rinsed his plate. It's been 2 months, Lauren. They should be looking elsewhere by now. His words seemed reasonable on the surface. After 2 months, the chances of finding the twins were statistically low. But something in his tone set off alarm bells in Lauren's mind. Why would he want the searches to stop? Unable to sleep that night, Lauren stared at the ceiling, the day's inconsistencies churning in her mind, the strange purchases, Nathan's lie about the auction, the delivery to Millfield that didn't happen. Each might be insignificant alone, but together they formed a pattern she couldn't ignore. She turned to look at the clock on her bedside table. 11:40 p.m. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the old farmhouse settling. Nathan's room was down the hall. He'd moved in after Mark's death to help with the farm, and had stayed to support her after the twins disappeared. Now she wondered if his continued presence served another purpose entirely. As Lauren lay in the darkness, the sudden rumble of an engine broke the night's silence. She sat up, listening. The distinctive sound of Nathan's truck starting up outside sent a jolt of adrenaline through her body. Through her window, she watched his headlights move toward the barn rather than the main road. She frowned, checking. The clock again, 11:45 p.m. Mark had always prepared deliveries the evening before, never in the middle of the night. Her hand trembled on the windowsill as she watched Nathan's truck heading toward the barn. For a moment, she saw him as he was at Mark's funeral, the steady presence who held her upright when her knees buckled at the graveside. Then the image shifted to the falsified delivery records, the secret purchases, his evasive eyes when questioned. He wouldn't, she whispered to the empty room, but another voice in her mind responded. Wouldn't he? Her fingers hovered over her phone, doubt paralyzing her. Nathan had been her rock these past months, managing the farm, dealing with authorities, supporting her through the darkest period of her life. What if she was wrong? What if this midnight errand had a perfectly innocent explanation? The thought of betraying his trust with suspicion made her stomach twist with shame. But then she thought of the discrepancies Detective Rivera mentioned, the strange purchases, Nathan's lie about his whereabouts. The math didn't add up. Her children were still missing. What if Nathan knew something he wasn't sharing? What if he had been lying about more than just his whereabouts? The possibility, however remote, was enough. She reached for her phone, her decision made. Lauren dialed Mrs. Keller, speaking in hushed tones as she moved away from the window. Mrs. Keller, I'm sorry to call so late. Lauren, what's wrong, dear? The elderly woman's voice was alert despite the hour. Nathan just went to the barn, she whispered, peeking through the curtains to confirm his truck was still parked outside the structure. It's almost midnight. There was a pause on the line before Mrs. Keller responded. Do you think he's hiding something? Lauren explained about the search teams coming in the morning and the strange credit card charges she found earlier. Building supplies, ventilation equipment, things we don't need, she added, her voice trembling slightly. Now this midnight trip to the barn. I was going to follow him. Be careful, Mrs. Keller warned, her voice sharp with concern. If he's moving farm equipment or supplies, you'll need proof. Keep your distance and just observe. Should I call Detective Rivera? Lauren asked, already pulling on a pair of jeans over her pajama bottoms. Not yet, Mrs. Keller advised. You need evidence of financial wrongdoing first. Just see what he's doing. Lauren promised she'd be careful and ended the call. As she slipped out of bed, guilt and determination warred within her. Guilt at suspecting the man who had shouldered her burdens. Determination to find any clue about her missing daughters. She pulled on her robe and boots, each movement a conscious choice to trust her instincts over her loyalty to Nathan. Moving quietly through the kitchen, she grabbed a small flashlight from the drawer, but decided not to turn it on yet. Moonlight provided enough visibility as she followed the path toward the barn where Nathan's truck was parked, her heart hammering with the terrible possibility that she was about to uncover a betrayal worse than she had ever imagined. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying the scent of freshly cut hay and the earthy smell of the nearby fields. Lauren's heart pounded in her chest as she approached the barn, staying close to the shadows of the old oak tree that had stood, sentinel beside the structure for generations. Through the partially open barn door, she saw Nathan straining to move one of the large rectangular hay bales at the back of the barn. His muscles flexed as he managed to slide it several feet to the side. Lauren crouched lower, watching intently. The twins used to play around those hay bales, building forts and hiding spots during rainy afternoons. Now Nathan was treating them with an urgency that seemed out of place for simple farm maintenance. He reached into his truck bed and pulled out several plastic bags, then began spreading something around the hay bale and throughout the barn. Lauren caught sight of the label on one of the bags, Vermguard. As Nathan set it down before returning to his truck for more, Lauren quickly pulled out her phone and searched for Vermguard. The results confirmed it was a commercial-grade rodent repellent. Relief washed over her briefly. Maybe Nathan was just trying to protect her from worry about a rat infestation. He was always shielding her from farm problems, especially since the twins disappeared. She felt a pang of guilt for suspecting him of financial wrongdoing, when he might just have been handling a pest problem without burdening her. Hot shame washed over her as she thought of all the ways Nathan had stepped up since Mark's death, managing the farm alone, supporting her through her grief, organizing search parties for the twins without complaint. How could she doubt his intentions after everything he had sacrificed? She was about to put her phone away when a product review caught her eye. Warning to canine handlers. Vermguard severely affects tracking abilities of service and search dogs. Keeps rats away, but made my guide dog sick for weeks. Lauren's throat constricted as she reread the comment. Tomorrow morning, search teams with trained dogs would be sweeping the property again. Why would Nathan spread rat poison the night before? Could he be hiding something he didn't want the dogs to find? The financial irregularities, questionable purchases, cash withdrawals. Perhaps Nathan had been siphoning money from the farm and hiding evidence in the barn. But a darker thought surfaced in Lauren's mind, one so terrible she could barely acknowledge it. What if Nathan's midnight activities had nothing to do with money at all? Lauren watched as Nathan scanned the yard before climbing into his truck. The engine started, and headlights cut through the darkness as he drove toward the house. Lauren remained frozen behind the oak tree, caught between loyalty and suspicion. If he had been embezzling from the farm, especially from the twins' college fund, she needed to know. But the growing knot in her stomach suggested something far worse might be at stake. She waited until Nathan's truck disappeared around the bend, then stood on shaky legs. Taking a deep breath, Lauren moved forward, driven by a mother's responsibility, to protect what remained of her family's security. With trembling fingers, she switched on her small flashlight and stepped inside the barn, determined to uncover whatever Nathan was trying to keep hidden. The barn seemed different at night, filled with looming shadows that stretched across the worn wooden floor. Lauren made her way carefully to the back corner where she had seen Nathan working earlier. The smell was overwhelming, a sharp chemical odor from the Vermguard substance Nathan had so carefully spread around the area, mixing with the familiar scent of hay and the musty undertone of decades-old wood. Lauren covered her nose with her sleeve, her eyes watering slightly from the potent aroma as she approached the suspicious area. Swinging her flashlight beam around the space, she noticed how the hay bales were stacked too neatly, too deliberately, forming a perfect rectangle over a section of the floor that seemed slightly discolored compared to the surrounding boards. Lauren traced the pattern of the Vermguard granules with her light, noting how the surrounding area was liberally covered with the dark substance, creating a distinct pattern that seemed designed to draw attention away from these particular bales. She remembered the online comment about scent detection and dogs, and her stomach tightened with dread. Nathan wasn't just hiding financial documents. This was something much more significant. Lauren ran her hands along the edge of one hay bale, noticing how freshly cut it felt compared to the others stored in the barn. The twins had loved playing hide-and-seek among the older bales, their laughter echoing through the cavernous space as they found increasingly creative hiding spots. The memory sent a fresh wave of grief through her, momentarily stopping her breath. She pushed against the bale experimentally, finding it slid more easily than its weight would suggest. Drawing on strength she didn't know she had, Lauren began moving the bales one by one, her muscles straining with each push. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool night air, and her breathing became labored as she worked, constantly glancing toward the barn entrance, terrified that Nathan might return. As she pushed aside the final hay bale, she discovered a section of flooring that didn't match the rest, a perfectly camouflaged hatch with carefully disguised hinges, nearly invisible when covered by hay. The wood was newer, stained to match the surrounding planks, but the grain pattern didn't align with the century-old floorboards around it. Her hands shook as she found the hidden edge and pulled, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might alert Nathan all the way back at the house. The hatch was heavy but rose on silent hinges, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. This was what the building supplies were for, she realized with growing horror. Not embezzlement, but something far worse. Lauren directed her flashlight beam into the opening, illuminating concrete walls lined with the soundproofing materials from the credit card statements. The beam traveled further into the space, revealing a small cot in one corner, a battery-powered lamp, and books stacked neatly beside makeshift bedding. Then the light found two pale faces looking up at her, eyes wide with disbelief. Her twin daughters looking thinner and disheveled, but unmistakably alive. Lauren dropped to her knees, the flashlight clattering to the floor beside her as she stared down into the hidden room, her mind unable to process what her eyes were seeing. Her missing daughters, here all along, hidden beneath her own barn. For a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning, reality suspended as she gazed into the faces she had thought she might never see again. Abby, Emma, she whispered, her voice breaking on their names, afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter this impossible moment and reveal it as nothing more than a desperate dream. The twins looked up at her with expressions that mirrored her own disbelief, their faces illuminated by the fallen flashlight's beam. They were alive. They were here, and Nathan, the man she had trusted with everything, had kept them prisoner beneath her feet for 2 months while she grieved them as dead. "Mom," Abby whispered, shielding her eyes from the direct beam of the flashlight, her voice raspy as if from disuse. She looked thinner than Lauren remembered, her once round cheeks hollowed, her blonde hair tangled and dull. "Are you better now?" Emma peered up anxiously, her small face serious in the harsh light. "We've been so worried about you," she added, studying her mother's face with concern. "Are you all better now? Is that why you finally came?" Lauren's brow furrowed in confusion. "Sick? What do you mean, sweetie? I haven't been sick." The twins exchanged puzzled glances before Emma spoke, "But Uncle Nathan told us we had to stay quiet in here so you could get better." She looked at Lauren with growing confusion, as if trying to reconcile her presence with what they'd been told. "He said you needed special medicine and couldn't have any excitement or visitors because it would make your condition worse." Lauren stared at her daughters, horror congealing in her stomach as she processed their words. Nathan had been keeping them prisoner while convincing them it was for their mother's health. The twins' faces were smudged with dirt, their once vibrant, blonde hair now dull and tangled. She noticed a small battery-powered lamp in the corner, several books stacked neatly beside the cot, and remnants of food on paper plates. The underground room was meticulously constructed, with concrete walls covered in the acoustic padding she had seen on Nathan's credit card statements, and a small ventilation system humming quietly in the corner. She fumbled for her phone with trembling hands, her vision blurred by tears as she struggled to unlock the screen. With fingers that felt suddenly numb, she dialed Detective Rivera's number, praying he would answer despite the late hour. "Detective Rivera," came his voice after 2 rings, sounding alert despite the hour. "I found them," Lauren said, her voice breaking. "My daughters, they're alive. They've been here the whole time, hidden in a secret room under our barn." Her words tumbled out in a rush, barely coherent through her tears. "Nathan did this. He built a room under the barn and has been keeping them prisoner." She listened to Rivera's shocked response, his rapid questions about the girl's condition, and his assurance that officers were already being dispatched to the property. The entire time, she couldn't take her eyes off the twins, terrified. They might somehow disappear again if she looked away even for a moment. Stay where you are, Mrs. Winters, Rivera instructed firmly. Officers are on their way. Don't confront Nathan if he returns. Just stay with the girls and wait for backup. Only after ending the call did Lauren climb down the ladder, her movements clumsy in her haste. The underground room was surprisingly large, perhaps 12 feet square, with a small cot against one wall that the twins had apparently been sharing. A plastic bucket in the corner served as a makeshift toilet, partially hidden behind a hanging sheet. Lauren gathered both girls into her arms, sobbing as she held them. They felt thinner than she remembered, their shoulder blades protruding sharply beneath their thin pajama tops. Their skin smelled of the musty underground space, a far cry from the fruity shampoo they had always used. I thought I'd lost you forever, Lauren whispered, pressing kisses to their foreheads, their cheeks, the tops of their heads. I've been searching everywhere for you. The twins clung to their mother but expressed confusion about her reaction, their small faces puzzled as they pulled back to look at her. You knew we were here, right? Abby asked, her voice small and uncertain. Uncle Nathan said it was your idea, that you asked him to keep us safe down here while you got better. Emma nodded in agreement, twisting one of her dirty braids around her finger. He brought us meals every day and books to read and told us stories about how you were slowly recovering. Her brow furrowed with confusion. He said we couldn't make any noise or come out because it might make you sicker. He made us promise never to try to leave even when he wasn't here, because it would be dangerous for you if we did. What kind of rules did Uncle Nathan set for you while you were down here? Lauren asked carefully, trying to keep her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. Emma began to speak, her voice dropping to a whisper. There were special rules for when he visits at night. Abby quickly shushed her, casting a nervous glance toward the ladder. We're not supposed to talk about that part, she said firmly, a hint of fear in her eyes. He said you'd be really mad if you found out, and then you might get sick again. Listen to me, Lauren said, gently tilting their faces up to look at her. I was never sick. I've been looking for you every single day since you disappeared. Uncle Nathan lied to you. He took you and hid you here without my knowledge. The twins exchanged confused glances, trying to process this revelation. But why would he do that? Emma asked, her lower lip trembling. Lauren struggled to find an explanation that wouldn't terrify them further. That doesn't matter right now, she said finally. What matters is that I found you, and you're safe now. The police are on their way, and they're going to help us. She held her daughters close, rocking them gently, as she had done when they were infants. As they nestled against her, Emma's small voice broke the silence. Mom, are you mad at us for following Uncle Nathan's night rules? Her voice quivered with anxiety. He said it was important that we did exactly what he said when he visited after dark. Abby quickly elbowed her sister, her eyes wide with warning. Shh! Lauren's body went rigid, her arms tightening instinctively around her daughters as the meaning behind their words registered. The relief of finding them alive began to transform into something darker, a protective rage building inside her chest like a gathering storm. She forced herself to keep her expression neutral, despite the bile rising in her throat. But her mind was suddenly flooded with horrifying possibilities of what Nathan might have done to her children during these night visits. What kind of rules? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. But the twins shrank back, sensing the change in her demeanor. Lauren felt rage and horror war within her as she processed what her daughters were saying, the implications too, terrible to fully comprehend. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she struggled to maintain a calm expression for the twins' sake. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to get her children away from this place, away from the possibility of Nathan's return before the police arrived. We're leaving right now, she told them firmly, her voice low and steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Those rules aren't real and you never have to follow them again, I promise. She looked each girl in the eye, trying to project confidence and safety, while her heart hammered against her ribs. The girls exchanged uncertain glances, years of trust in their uncle clearly at war with their mother's unexpected arrival. Lauren gently took each girl by the hand, helping them up the ladder one at a time. Her movements urgent, but measured to avoid frightening them further. Abby went. First, her thin legs trembling slightly with the effort after weeks of confinement. Emma followed, constantly looking back at her mother as if afraid Lauren might disappear. Once all three were standing in the barn, Lauren took a moment to truly see her daughters in the better light. Their faces were pale from lack of sunlight, their eyes wide and uncertain in the new surroundings. Lauren swallowed hard against the lump in her throat, fighting back tears that would only frighten them more. "Let's go to the house," she whispered, pulling them close. "The police will be here soon." As they moved toward the barn entrance, Emma suddenly froze mid-step, her small body going rigid. She pointed to the small, dust-covered window near the loft, her finger trembling visibly. "Headlights," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lauren followed her daughter's gaze and saw twin beams cutting through the darkness outside, sweeping across the property as a vehicle approached along the dirt drive. The familiar rumble of Nathan's truck engine sent ice through her veins. "Uncle Nathan sometimes comes back in the middle of the night," Emma whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "He checks on us when he can't sleep." Lauren's mind raced, calculating the seconds before Nathan would reach the barn. She quickly ushered the twins behind the remaining hay bales, instructing them to stay silent and still no matter what happened. She positioned herself near the entrance, her heart pounding in her ears as she grabbed a pitchfork from where it hung on the wall, its metal tines gleaming dully in the faint moonlight filtering through the barn windows. "Whatever happens, don't come out until I tell you it's safe," she instructed them, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you hear anything scary, stay hidden. The police are coming." She saw the fear in their eyes but had no time to comfort them further. As the truck door slammed outside, the barn door creaked open on its rusted hinges, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent night. Nathan entered, muttering about the door being unlocked, his flashlight beam sweeping across the floor in aggressive arcs. "Thought I'd close this," he said under his breath, his voice tight with suspicion. Lauren pressed herself against the wall, hidden in the shadows. As Nathan's light paused on the section of floor where the hay bales had been moved aside, revealing the open hatch, his posture changed instantly, tension visible in every line of his body. "Girls," he called down, his voice initially gentle, coaxing. "Are you hiding from me?" When no response came, his tone hardened, an edge of anger creeping in. "I told you what happens when you break the rules." The flashlight beam darted around, the barn interior, searching as Nathan moved toward the open hatch. Lauren watched him climb down the ladder, her grip tightening on the pitchfork as she heard him moving around in the underground room. His footsteps became more frantic, accompanied by increasingly agitated muttering. When Nathan climbed back up the ladder and quickly emerged, his movements frantic now, he spotted Lauren standing near the entrance, the pitchfork gripped tightly in her hands. Beyond her, partially visible behind a hay bale, were the twins huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. Nathan's expression shifted through shock, then anger, then a terrible possessive rage that transformed his familiar features into something monstrous. "You've ruined everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but filled with such menace that Lauren felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. "I've been so patient. I built them a safe place, protected them from everything." His eyes darted between Lauren and the twins, a calculation happening behind them that sent fresh fear coursing through her. Lauren raised the pitchfork defensively as Nathan lunged at her with unexpected speed, knocking the improvised weapon from her hands and sending it clattering across the wooden floor. She heard one of the twins cry out in terror as she stumbled backward, desperately trying to keep herself between Nathan and her daughters. Nathan tackled Lauren to the ground with unexpected force, his weight pinning her arms as years of farm work gave him a physical advantage. His face hovered inches from hers, spittle flying as he ranted about his vision for their future. His eyes were wild, pupils dilated in the dim light, a feverish intensity to his gaze that Lauren had never seen before. "We could have been a family," he hissed, his voice dripping with a deranged conviction that chilled Lauren to her core. "I've been raising them right, teaching them to love me. Do you know how patient I've been with you, waiting for you to see what we could have together?" Lauren saw the twins peeking from behind the hay bale, their faces frozen in terror. She felt a surge of maternal strength as she heard one of them whimper in fear. She managed to free one arm and clawed at Nathan's face, her nails leaving deep red furrows across his cheek. He howled in pain, momentarily loosening his grip. "Run!" Lauren screamed to the twins. "Run to Mrs. Keller's house now!" The girls hesitated, torn between obeying their mother and their fear of disobeying Nathan's rules. Lauren seized the opportunity of Nathan's distraction to roll away from him, scrambling to her feet as she searched desperately for a weapon. Her hand closed around the wooden handle of a nearby shovel leaning against a support beam. "Go!" Lauren shouted again, and this time, the twins bolted toward the barn door, their bare feet slapping against the wooden boards. Nathan lurched to his feet, blood streaming down his cheek from Lauren's scratch. His eyes tracked the fleeing girls, and he moved to follow them. But Lauren stepped into his path, swinging the shovel with all her might. With a guttural cry that contained months of grief and rage, she connected with his shoulder, the metal edge hit with a sickening thud, the impact reverberating up Lauren's arms. Nathan stumbled backward, momentarily off balance, pain contorting his features, but he recovered quickly, muscles tensing as he prepared to lunge again. His eyes were cold now, calculating, all pretense of familial affection gone. "They're mine now," he growled, his voice barely recognizable as the brother-in-law who had comforted her after Mark's death. "You've ignored them, grieved them when they were right here. You don't deserve them." His lips curled into a snarl as he advanced toward her. Mark never appreciated what he had either, always taking everything for granted. The implication in his words sent ice through Lauren's veins. Had Nathan been responsible for Mark's accident as well? The thought was too horrifying to contemplate fully, but it fell into place with terrible clarity. Nathan's immediate presence after Mark's death, his insistence on handling all farm matters, his growing possessiveness. Lauren positioned herself between Nathan and the barn door, the shovel gripped tightly in her trembling hands. She could hear the twins' footsteps receding as they ran across the yard, hopefully toward safety. "They'll never be yours," Lauren said, her voice steadier than she felt. "They're Mark's daughters and mine." Something in her words seemed to snap the last thread of Nathan's restraint. He charged at her with a roar of fury, but before he could reach her, the barn door burst open with a splintering crack. Light flooded the space as police officers rushed in with weapons drawn, their voices overlapping as they shouted commands. "Police! Hands in the air! Down on the ground now!" Detective Rivera led the group, his service weapon trained on Nathan. Flashlight beams cut through the dust-filled air, illuminating the scene in harsh detail. Nathan froze mid-stride, his body going unnaturally still as he processed this unexpected development. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hands, his entire demeanor transforming before Lauren's eyes. His face softened into a mask of confusion and wounded innocence. The rage that had contorted his features moments ago disappeared so completely that Lauren almost doubted what she had seen. If she hadn't experienced his violence firsthand, she might have believed the performance he was now putting on. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding," he said, his voice steady and reasonable now, a stark contrast to his manic rage of moments before. "I was just trying to protect my nieces." "Down on the ground, face down, hands behind your back," Rivera repeated, his weapon unwavering. Two officers moved forward cautiously, their own weapons aimed at Nathan's chest. Nathan complied, lowering himself to his knees and then lying, face down on the barn floor, his hands extended behind his back. As officers handcuffed him, reciting his rights while securing his wrists, Lauren dropped the shovel and rushed outside, where another officer was carefully wrapping emergency blankets around her daughter's shoulders. The reflective material caught the flashing lights of police vehicles, creating a surreal glow around the twins as they huddled together, looking small and fragile against the backdrop of chaos. Emma reached for Lauren's hand, her fingers ice cold, despite the mild night air. "Is Uncle Nathan in trouble?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Lauren knelt beside her daughters, pulling them close as she struggled to find words that wouldn't frighten them further. "Yes, sweetheart. What he did was very wrong. But you're safe now. And that's all that matters." In the distance, more sirens announced arriving police vehicles, their wailing cutting through the night. Lauren caught sight of Mrs. Keller's old station wagon bouncing down the dirt road toward the farm, the elderly woman likely having seen the police lights from her porch. Lauren felt a wave of gratitude for her neighbor's steadfast support, knowing she would need all the help she could get to help her daughters heal from their ordeal. As Nathan was led to a waiting police car, his eyes met Lauren's across the yard. For a brief moment, the facade dropped, and she saw the raw hatred beneath. Then he was being placed in the back seat, the door closing on whatever words he might have spoken. The paramedics guided Lauren and the twins toward the waiting ambulance. Lauren kept her arms wrapped around her daughter's shoulders as they climbed inside, their small bodies trembling against hers. The vehicle pulled away from the farm, red and blue lights reflecting off the barn's weathered walls as they disappeared down the long driveway into the night. During the drive to the hospital, the twins huddled close to Lauren on the narrow gurney, their eyes wide as they took in the unfamiliar equipment surrounding them. Emma looked up at her mother, her voice barely audible over the ambulance's engine. "Is Uncle Nathan going to be mad at us?" she asked, fear evident in every syllable. Lauren brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead, struggling to find words that wouldn't add to their confusion. "No, sweetheart," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're safe now, that's all that matters." As the ambulance sped through the night, Lauren held her daughters close, knowing that the road to healing would be long and difficult, but feeling, for the first time in 2 months, that there might be a future worth fighting for. At the hospital, where the twins were being examined, Detective Rivera stood with Lauren in the hallway outside their room, his notebook open as he explained what they had discovered. Lauren couldn't stop glancing through the window at her daughters, afraid they might somehow vanish again if she looked away too long. Nathan had been planning this for months, Rivera explained, his voice low to avoid being overheard by the twins. The underground room construction had begun shortly after Mark died, which explains the building supplies and ventilation system purchases you found. He likely timed the noisier work, like excavation, for periods when you were off the farm making deliveries and disguised larger supply drop-offs as routine agricultural deliveries. Rivera confirmed that the Vermguard substance Nathan had spread throughout the barn had been specifically chosen to mask human scent. "It's actually marketed as a pest repellent," Rivera explained, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "But in underground forums it's known for its ability to throw off search dogs. That's why our previous searches with the K9 units never found anything. He'd been using it regularly around the barn." Lauren leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted as the adrenaline of the night began to fade. Rivera placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did what we couldn't, Mrs. Winters. You found your daughters when an entire investigation team failed." His eyes reflected both admiration and regret. "We will ensure Nathan never hurts another child." Before Lauren could respond, the door to the examination room opened, and a doctor emerged, clipboard in hand. Dr. Patel was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle manner that had immediately put the twins at ease. "Mrs. Winters," she said, gesturing for Lauren to join her a few steps away from Rivera. "I've completed my initial examination of Abby and Emma." Lauren braced herself, terrified of what the doctor might tell her. "Are they okay?" Dr. Patel's expression was carefully neutral. "Physically, they're stable, dehydrated and malnourished, but without severe injuries. Their weight is concerning. They've both lost approximately 15% of their body mass since their last documented medical visit." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "However, the psychological impact of their captivity will require specialized support. I'm recommending immediate consultation with Dr. Levine, our pediatric trauma specialist." Lauren nodded, determined to get her daughters whatever help they needed, her mind still processing the horror of what Nathan had done. "When can I take them home?" "We'd like to keep them overnight for observation and hydration," Dr. Patel replied. "If all goes well, they should be able to go home the day after tomorrow. I'll arrange for Dr. Levine to meet with all of you tomorrow morning to begin the psychological assessment." As the doctor left to make arrangements, Lauren returned to the twins' room. They were sitting up in adjacent beds, looking small beneath the hospital blankets. Someone had found them clean pajamas with cartoon characters printed on them, replacing the filthy clothes they had been wearing for 2 months. Lauren spent the night in a chair between their beds, dozing fitfully, jolting awake at every small sound and movement. Despite the doctor's reassurances, she couldn't bring herself to sleep properly, afraid her daughters might somehow vanish again if she closed her eyes for too long. The night passed slowly, punctuated by nurses' quiet checks and the soft beeping of distant monitors in the hospital corridor. Mrs. Keller arrived at the hospital just after dawn, her eyes red from crying happy tears. She rushed to Lauren and embraced her tightly, her thin arms surprisingly strong. "If you hadn't called me that night and had the courage to investigate," she whispered, clutching Lauren's hands in her own weathered ones. Lauren squeezed back, grateful for the elderly woman's unwavering support. Mrs. Keller had been the one who had urged her to trust her instincts, despite how painful the truth might be. Without that push, Lauren might have dismissed her suspicions, believing Nathan's lies for who knows how much longer. Throughout the morning, more visitors arrived. Lauren's in-laws stood by the door, their faces etched with guilt that none of them had suspected the monster living under their own roof. Mark's parents had always treated Nathan as the less responsible brother, focusing their attention and expectations on Mark. Now they wondered if that lifelong dynamic had fed a resentment that eventually turned to something much darker. Around midday, Rivera returned with updates. Nathan was in custody, denied bail due to flight risk and the severity of the charges. During a search of his room at the farmhouse, they had found journals detailing his obsession with Lauren, dating back years, even before Mark's death. The implications were too horrible to voice aloud, but the question of whether Mark's fatal accident had been truly an accident hung unspoken in the air. The day passed in a blur of doctors, police officers, and well-meaning visitors. Dr. Levine, the pediatric trauma specialist, conducted a gentle initial assessment with the twins mid-morning. Her kind, measured approach helped the girls open up just enough for her to recommend ongoing therapy, while reassuring Lauren that children possessed remarkable resilience with proper support. Lauren barely left the twins' sides after the session, each separation, even to use the restroom, filling her with irrational panic that they might disappear again. Mrs. Keller stayed through it all, shooing away visitors when the twins began to look overwhelmed, bringing Lauren food she barely touched, and running interference with hospital staff when necessary. As evening approached, the stream of visitors finally ended. The twins, exhausted by the day's events and medical examinations, drifted off to sleep, their small hands intertwined even in slumber, as if afraid to be separated again. "You should rest too," Mrs. Keller told her gently from the doorway, having just returned from the cafeteria with 2 cups of tea. "I'll watch over them for a while." Lauren nodded, but didn't move from her chair. "I can't leave them," she whispered. "Not yet." As the last light of day bathed the room in a soft glow, Lauren gently smoothed Abby's hair and allowed herself to feel something she had thought was lost forever. Hope. The road ahead would be difficult. There would be investigations, trials, and years of therapy. The twins would need specialized support to process their trauma, and Lauren herself would need help to guide them through it. But they were alive. That impossible fact still hadn't fully registered. After 2 months of grief and searching and despair, her daughters were breathing, sleeping, living. They would go home tomorrow to begin the long process of healing and rebuilding.